I was having issues with my cycle prior to. So I was going to the doctor. We were trying to get my birth control situated. We're trying to get something situated. Like my cycle was going way too long. And I've always had really bad cramps from the time that I was like from high school. Like I'm talking about I had to leave. My daddy had to come pick me up, put me over his shoulder, leave school type cramps. And so as an adult, I was still going through that. So my gynecologist and I were trying to just figure out the right things to do. So I go to my annual. It leads up to my annual. We finally found the right one. Get to my annual, you're laying on the thing and they're touching all around you and they're like, do you do your breast checks at home? And it's like you don't want to lie and you don't want to sound like you're not taking care of your body. So you're like, sometimes. And so she goes, And I'm like, what you humming about? And she goes to the other one and she goes back and she's like, hold on. And she goes back and she gets Dr. Reedy and they come in and they're like, okay, listen, we need to set you up with a mammogram. Now, keep in mind, I didn't even know how to spell mammogram at the time. It wasn't a part of my vocabulary. When things just aren't a part of your everyday vocabulary, you're not really, I didn't know anything about cancer, breast cancer, and I didn't really even like the color pink. So I'm just kind of like, what do you mean? And they're like, you gotta go. And I'm just like, okay. So they finished the exam. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, what's happening? So I was so disconnected that I left the information for the breast center at the doctor's office. Like I was just like, So the next day they called me and like, hey, you left your information. We need you to go. We scheduled you an appointment. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I got up and went and they did all of it. They kept checking out. I wasn't heavy chested. I was a good, strong C, good 34C. Okay. So I'm like, why are they continuing to check me like this? Like, what's happening? I didn't know. And then they're like, we need you to come back in for a biopsy. A biopsy. These are all words and terminologies that I just wasn't familiar with. And one of my homegirls, and I said, hey, have you ever had a biopsy? And she's like, oh, girl, you'll be fine. It's just something routine. Now that 31, you just got to go through all this stuff. And I was like, okay. And then fast forward to that following week, I'm on air. I'm doing breaks. And I get a call from my doctor. And I answer because I'm thinking, there's no way that she's going to tell me anything bad. So I answer the phone and she says, after our testing, we saw that somewhere, but then we found, and I went blank. Mind you, I'm on air though. I went blank. And the last thing I remember her saying was, I need you to come down to the doctor's office today because we have to talk further. And I'm looking at the clock and I have a break to do. And I'm like, okay. And I just hang up the phone. I get back on air. I do my break. And I'm sitting at the station. I'm sitting in my chair. I'm looking and I'm just sitting there. And I just break down. I immediately I call my pastor, Pastor AD at the time. And he's like, you have to call your family. And I'm like, I don't want to call my family. My family's in Detroit. I had some family in Huntsville at the time, but I did not want to call my parents. We had already gone through just so much, like just other stuff. It'd been a crazy year. So I called my parents and my dad just screamed. My mom was like, give me the phone. They were like, we're on our way. They were ready to get on a flight from Detroit to come to Huntsville. And I was like, just wait. At the time, my grandmother was living and my aunt was in Huntsville. I was like, we'll go and we'll just kind of go from there. Then I had to go tell, the dad at the time. And he had already known that I was going to the doctor for stuff. And as soon as he saw my face, he was like, go home. He gave me a hug. I burst out in tears. He was like, go home and keep me posted. And then I went to the doctor and honestly, I don't remember anything she said. Thank God for my grandmother and my aunt. They took notes. I'm on the phone. This is me. I'm texting my homegirls like, hey, how are you guys doing? What y'all doing today? Da 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 da. And they was like, oh da da da. They're like, what's up with you? I said, oh nothing. I just found out I had cancer. And I just went blank. That's how I told it's 6 of us that grew up together. And so like I'm the 5th, and that's how I told the other 5 in the group chat. And of course they're blowing my phone up, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I'll talk to y'all later. I was just so like in shock. I couldn't wrap my head around it. And so from then, I just remember that was in May of 2013. I started chemo June 6th. June 6th. And so I had 18 weeks of chemo. They wanted to shrink the tumor. My tumor I was stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma. And here's the thing, I go get my annuals every year. So within a year's time, a tumor formed in my body and was growing. Also, I had an inverted nipple. I thought that it was just something that, well, something that happened when I was a child. I knew nothing that that was an indicator that there was pulling. It was pulling. It was pulling, and no idea. So mind you, my doctors are crying. They don't know what's going on because at the time I was their youngest patient. They never had anybody. I was didn't drink, didn't smoke, vegetarian, healthy. They were just so my Dr. Scott literally cried telling me my results because she did not understand like what is happening. And so they just did this immediate come up with this cocktail. And I mean, it was intensive. It was intensive. But I will say the love and care that I received at Clearview Cancer Institute was top notch. Like they welcomed me with open arms. It was it was almost like, and I know this might sound crazy, but as much as I was going through, it was literally some of the happiest times because I was fighting, but it was just like walking in there, seeing those people. In my mind, I was like, I know this could be a lot worse. I would go in there and I would go get my blood. I didn't get a port because I didn't want anything in me. My veins are currently trashed because they did everything in my veins. But I just remember seeing other people around me and they just looked like they were going through so much worse. And I remember there was this one person that they were there by themselves getting treatment. And I just remember going up to them being like, you're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And it was just that type of like when you're in that environment, it literally changes you. And I had amazing friends. I had amazing family. My parents flew in from Detroit literally every time I had a treatment until I told them they could stop, until we got to the halfway point. And then that's when the tumor shrank. And then that's when they decided, okay, you don't have to get a mastectomy, you can get a lumpectomy. And so I was able to get it taken out. So like right now, you know how like as women, we already have like one breast bigger than the other. So I really have one breast that's big because they literally took half of it out when they did the surgery. And so I couldn't get breast augmentation or implants because of where my incision was. They were fearful that if they went in, I would bleed out. And I was like, you know what? I'll just be uneven for the rest of my life. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you live from cancer and die from getting like, I don't know, implants? I think not. And so I went to a Birmingham doctor and one in Huntsville, and they both told me the same thing. And I was like, we just don't have to deal with these girls the way that they are. But I did 37 weeks of radiation. And the radiation probably was the one that emotionally took me through because I was going every single day. And I thought that I could be okay going by myself, but it was taking a toll on me just being in there every single. And I remember when I rang the bell and it was over, I went outside in the parking lot and I cried. It was like the weight of everything just came out of me. Did you think I went to work every day, except for the days that I had chemo, because I couldn't sit. I couldn't sit at home. I couldn't sit. I'm a thinker. And I'm a thinker and I'm a feeler. And I just was like, I have to be active. I wanted to live. At the time when they told me, they didn't know how long or what they never seen anything like my case before. And my oncologist, when I got better, real talk, my oncologist was like, I don't know. I know you always talk about this God you serve. Whatever, whomever it is, I just know that you're about to be my last patient because I've never seen anything like this. When I tell you that man literally retired after me, he did. He retired after he said he wanted to end his career on a good note. Never seen from or heard from again. I got a whole new oncologist. I was like, wait, what? Yeah. But the interesting part about all of this is at the beginning of 2013, I did, when you do your New Year's resolutions and things like that, it wasn't that. I just had a prayer. And I asked God to give me three things: to appreciate my job more, be more active in the community, and increase my faith. Ironically, through breast cancer, all three of those questions were answered. Listen, when I say be careful what you ask for, be careful what you ask for. All three of those prayers were answered. It was insane. So right now, I tell women that as African American women, we do die from it more. And I remember when Liz Hurley came to the station when she found out I had it. She says, "You have to be the voice for your community. I can't talk to them the way that you can talk to them." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, you're Liz Hurley, like everybody." She was like, "No, no, 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 no. You can talk to them better than I can because you look like what they're going through." And I was just like, I was kind of confused. I had to like sit with that. But it wasn't until I told my story on air, the way my phone lines blew up, the way my social media blew up. I'm talking about I got messages from women, from husbands, boyfriends, like, "I don't know what to do, my girl, my wife." I mean, I was like, all of this is going on in Huntsville right now? All of these Black women, these issues in Huntsville right now? I had no idea. And I was able to connect with so many, and like even when you do the river run race and you see all the African American women down there, you're like, okay, this is a thing. And unfortunately, it's not talked about enough in our community. But you know how our community can be. We don't talk about anything. We don't find out anything until after someone dies. And then you're like, so what's the family? What, how, what, that, all of those things. Another crazy part about it was I always knew that something was going to happen to me medically. I was in high school. I said, I have a feeling that after I turn 30, something's going to happen to me. And it wasn't me speaking ill on myself, it was me being aware. And when it happened, although I was shocked, I remember sitting at home on my floor and I was like, yeah, you knew this was going to happen and you're going to be okay. I had just met my biological father the year before, like just met him. And all I wanted was family history. I kept saying that, like, listen, once I found out that he was alive and things of that nature, that was a possibility. I was like, I just want family history. That's all I was like, I don't really care about relationship. I just want family history because I knew my mom's side. I didn't know my, you know what I'm saying? It's just having both, like, it's important. So when I would go in to doctors and they would ask me, I would be like, I don't know. But here's the thing, I took every gene test, every single gene test, and everything came back negative. And here's something else that's gonna blow your mind. So I get it in 2013. My mom gets it 7 years later, and she has stage one. And I was on her so hard to go to her mammograms. I was like, you have to go, you have to go, you have to go. And she was like, girl, nothing wrong with me. Da 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 da. I was like, you have to go. Something was telling me you have to go, you have to go, you have to go. I remember I was headed to the nail shop, going to see my girl Deketra. My mom called me and she told me, and I asked her, I said, listen, if this is where we are, just don't let her have to go through what I went through. And so she just had to do radiation. She had to be on a pill. And the next year she was good. But the fact that she too took every gene test, so I get it first, and then my mom. So now I have to be on my little sister to make sure she's 24. So I have to be on her to go to the. I've been on her for months. Like she's two now. She's been having issues with her cycle. Hers is worse than mine. And so I'm like, family meeting. She needs to get home to Detroit. She needs to get to her doctor. We need to figure out what's going on with her. So this is just the blood. Now my grandmother, my mom's mom, she had uterine cancer. My grandmother's sister had brain cancer. Another one of her sisters, it was a different type of cancer. So I was confused because my all of this, well, the brain cancer was before my diagnosis. My grandmother died after I got healed, my grandmother passed away. And what was interesting about that was she went through when her cancer came back, it was like she had to go through the hardest part, but I had already gone through chemo. My grandma had never gone through chemo before. But it was interesting that I had gone through it. So I was the voice to help my family to understand. And I took care of her literally until the day that she took her very last breath. So it's just interesting how like it was all of those other ones, but when I took my gene test, everything came back clear. So that's what I was like, this is a God thing. We're gonna get through this. It's insane. It's a crazy story, but it's my story. And I've listened and I've heard so many other stories. I've come across women that were diagnosed at 18, 19, 20. Can you imagine being in college, being at A&M? and having to get a double mastectomy. You're 19 years old and you have to get a double mastectomy. I went to funerals of young women that I met along the journey. And so then you go through survivor's remorse because you're like, okay, how did I make it? But then they didn't make it. So then I had to get in therapy because when I hit the 5-year mark, I hit survivor's remorse really, really bad. It was an internal struggle. Like I would leave work, I was so depressed. And then my father died. He's my stepfather, but that was my daddy. He raised me. He passed away from bile duct cancer. And I was on the phone with him when he took his last breath. So it was just like all of this stuff was happening around me. And then just this past August, my biological father passed away from some random cancer. Gene test. Clear. Clear as day. Clear as day. So for our Black women, I wonder in my conversations, this is what I'm also finding out. So I wasn't talked to about like freezing my eggs or anything like that. So I was told that I would never be able to have kids. Um, I was like, okay. I was on this medicine called tamoxifen, and it was a cancer pill, basically, that I had to be on for 10 years. The downfall of that pill was it made me want to literally walk in traffic, stand in front of a bus, and die. Like it really messed with your emotions and your mental state. And a lot of people in my life at the time couldn't understand like my ups and my downs. I didn't understand because I'm a pretty like go with the flow type person. I'm mad chill. But that medicine took me through it. And I was on it for 7 years. And I asked my doctors, I was like, hey, can I get off of it? And they were like, let us go through your charts. Let us look at your tumor. I was like, you still have that? And they were like, yeah, it's in a lab. I was like, oh, okay. And so they checked it out and they were like, it was okay for me to get off. A year later, I lie to you not, my period came back. Now, one would be like, oh, that's exciting. No, I hadn't had a period for 7 years. So much has changed. Like, I remember sitting in Target on the floor on the phone with my best friend, like, there's so much new stuff. What do I do? What do I get? Girl, just get this. And I was like, okay. And I remember going to my oncologist and she was like, Dr. Deb, she said, yeah, this is weird. Your cycle's not supposed to be back. But here's the thing. I have menopause symptoms, hot flashes, all the big menopause symptoms to this day. Like this morning, like last night, I had a hot flash. I could sleep with towels behind my head. So I have menopause plus a cycle that comes every 21 days. They're on me now because they want to take my ovaries because they're like, at this point, they're fearful because my cancer was estrogen based. If I were to get pregnant, they're fearful, one, that the cancer will come back and that it will be a strain on my body. So it's like, you know, when you find out, like I never thought about having children, that's never any, but when you're told you can't, it's like, and then when you're told, even now, 10 years later, yo, we gotta get in here to take these ovaries out. And I'm like, yo, you're saying it lightly, but that's a big thing. It's more than ever. And I think it's because I'm getting a little older, like that emotional like trauma. And then sitting and having a conversation with other young women of all different nationalities and hearing that they have the option. They were given the option of freezing their eggs. The conversation was had with them. And then it was me and another Black young lady. We didn't have that conversation. Now she has a child, but she can't have another one. And that's just, it's done. She never had the conversation of freezing eggs. So that was something that stuck out to me. Like, why isn't that conversation had with more Black women about freezing eggs when they're going through any type of diagnosis that affects that part of the anatomy? Like, that's a question that I had. And it's something that needs to be highlighted because that's an option. That is an option. And it's an option, honestly, that insurances need to make sure that they honor. It's so many things. Making sure you have the right health insurance, making sure that it's covered. Luckily, a couple of months before I was diagnosed, I had just switched my insurance. And shout out to Blue Cross Blue Shield, Alabama, because that thing worked out in my favor. I picked the right plan. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, this is some real adulting. You gotta pick your insurance plan because I didn't want to do it through my job. It was a whole thing. I was like, I'll just do an individual plan. And when I did that, I was like, oh, this is real adulting. But Whenever I checked, it was the right thing. It's really interesting. Sometimes I sit back and I'm like, yo, I went to chemo and sat for 4 hours while these drugs were being pumped inside of me. Would go back the next day and get a white blood cell um, injection. And the first couple of ones literally took me out. They had me feeling like Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield. All the boxers were beating up on me. I mean, I would be in so much pain. I would get through the night, wake up the next morning, get on air like, hey, 103.1, we up. Home hip hop and R&B. It's your girl ML6.
But why would you do that? Like, if your body is like, come on, let's rest.
Because I felt like I didn't. I, so it was twofold. I didn't think that I was gonna die, but then you just don't know. So that being faith based, but then also having a sense of reality. And when you say when something is in God's will, you got to really own that and you got to let it go. So my thing was, I'm gonna live. If there's a baby shower, if there's a birthday party, if there's a family trip, I'm gonna show up. I might be asleep. Remember the last family trip we went on, and I'm so glad I went because it was one of the last ones with my dad. I was asleep the first 3 days. Then after that, we did a cruise to Hawaii. I was okay. And I couldn't do all the excursions, and he would literally like hold me up and walk with me. But I was just determined, like, because I had a chemo treatment right before I left for the cruise. But I was like, yo, I want to go. But that's one of my last major memories with my dad. So it was just like I needed and wanted to live. There was a time though, I remember walking into my apartment, I turned the key, and I honestly don't remember anything else. I woke up on the floor. My body had had enough. I was so tired that I literally passed out on the floor. And looking back, I probably should have rested more, but I was just so like, I gotta fight, I gotta fight. And then I felt like I had so many people rooting for me, and I didn't want to let anybody down. Even when they thought that it came back, I didn't tell anybody. And the only reason I told my parents was because I had to go back under anesthesia. And then I remember I had one of my friends. I was like, hey, can you pick me up and take me somewhere? He was like, yeah, I got you. He was like, why are we at the hospital? I was like, oh, they think my cancer came back. So I got to have another surgery. He was like, what? My friends really hated the way that I told them. But I just didn't want to be like, it to be dramatic. And I just was like, I didn't say anything because everybody championed around me when I was declared cancer free. I just didn't want it to be a disappointment to anybody else if it had come back. And so luckily they went in and it was just scar tissue, but I was really grateful for that. But it was just like the weight, it was a lot of different weights that I was carrying. Literally when they were like, oh, we have everything on our back, it was. And I may have put the pressure on myself, but I just felt like it wasn't just my fight. I never say that I beat. I believe that the community, we beat it together because everyone watched me go through it. And even from me, my hair fell out. Like, some people were like, that girl gone too far when they didn't know. And this is also why I tell people be kind because you never know what people are going through. It was, oh, she's gone too far. She cut all her hair off. Who she da 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 da. And not realizing like I did that because my hair was literally, I'm at work on air and I put my hands through my hair and a big clump of hair comes out. Mind you, I had a short haircut. It was shaved on one side. It was the whole thing. And I'm sitting there with hair. My dad was like, don't just sit there and watch it fall out. Go get a haircut. And I was like, what? He was like, go get your haircut. He was like, go ahead and be my little chocolate drop, my little milk dud. Sat in that chair and I got my haircut. And I remember crying. I remember sitting in the barbershop and there was people in there and they were like, you got to tell your story. You got to tell your story. And I was like, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. But when I did tell my story, I remember all the men at the station. They walked into the studio and they all cut their hair. Dave Person, Steve Murray, Big Ant, all of them, Roj A, they all cut their hair and they stood with me in solidarity. Lachey B, RJ, they stood in the studio with me when I announced it to the Tennessee Valley. Like the support that I got from my WIA fam, like was unmatched. In a work environment like that, like it was just, I mean, to this day, still extremely supportive of any and everything that I do. And that was helpful too. And just seeing the community rally behind me, it was just like, this is why Huntsville will always forever have a special place in my heart, because I went through a lot of major things. But that right there, literally going through cancer in the public eye and facing it the way that I did, I honestly don't even know what I would have done without the community support. But as a Black woman, it's like when you hear the statistics and you see the stories, and then you think about the women who aren't saying anything because they feel like they can't, because they have to be strong for everyone else in their family. Those are the things that like boil me, because I'm like, no, you need to get seen. You need to figure this out. We need to have these conversations in our community, and we got to be loud about it. Whenever I think that my story, I'm like, oh my God, so many people heard my story. God reminds me, like, no, 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 you're not done. You're not done. You have to get this message out. Black women need to know your self checks before your cycle, after your cycle. Look at your bodies. Know what's going on in your body. Be healthy. Eat right. Know the foods that you're supposed to eat for your blood type. Work out. Be careful what you're putting in your body. Like all of these things are important. I understand that taking care of the world is like top notch, but we as Black women have to take care of ourselves. If you feel anything, anything, go to the doctor, demand that mammogram and the 3D mammogram so they can see everything. Technology and all the things have increased and gotten better in over the 10 years. And it's not as difficult. Like you don't necessarily have to lose your hair anymore. They have this thing that they can put on your head. It's like a thing that like freezes your hair follicles or something. And it's so many different things that are available for women as a whole. But my heart, not only for Black women, but my heart is going to always be for the young Black woman. Young women are getting breast cancer. Young women are getting breast cancer. And I would love for that message to also be exemplified, because these young girls are going through it and they have literally there was no information for me. There was nothing for my age group. I had to write a book just to kind of give an experience from my perspective so that young women could have it. It's a one chapter book of just what I went through. It was a season in my life. For me to keep my healing, my dying, all of like, no, this is, I wasn't like, oh, why is this happening to me? Why? No, no, no. God said, this is happening for you so that you can literally help other people. So, okay, I'm going to help other people. And my slogan is, I had cancer. Cancer did not have me. And that's just it. Like it didn't take control of my entire life. I refused to let it take control of my entire life.